At the end of October. It is not chilly outside at the end of October in Atlanta, at least not as chilly as it is here. I want us to consider and talk together, and I do mean talk together. I will be stopping periodically and asking questions and asking you to talk amongst yourselves and give feedback. For those for whom this is being, excuse me.
I just found out we're not live streaming quite yet, so I
Yes,
wonder.
we are. Yes, we are.
Oh, we are?
We are. It's our, okay, as of about 30 seconds ago.
Okay, excuse the interruption.
We have one last thing though, Margaret, if I may. Tomorrow we're having a conversation that is going to follow up on your presentation. And so what we wanted to do is ask that folks would write on cards if they have a question that the group might want to discuss or comments, that we can begin to collect those so we can use we have 1 hour tomorrow morning. And so I'm just going to pass those cards around, and sorry for the interruption.
Okay, good enough. So as I said, I will be interrupting myself from time to time with questions. And those are not rhetorical questions. Those are real, live, genuine, I want you to talk to each other and then talk back to me questions. The intention of that is to get us to have a conversation, because I know that on the topic of race in the United States of America, I am not the only expert in this room, especially in this synod. I am not the only expert in this room. You all live in the megalopolis that stretches from New York and Philadelphia all the way up to Boston and beyond. There are more cities in the synod than probably any other city, any synod in the country. You all get this. So in some ways, I'm preaching to the choir. I know this. I apologize in advance. But please, I do want us to converse so that we can glean from the lived wisdom of everybody in the room and the experiences of everyone in the room. Probably the thing that we can do the best to begin to combat racism is to talk to each other and to listen to each other. So even as we consider some of these slides and statistics I've pulled together for tonight, I hope that we will take that invitation very, very seriously. Before I begin the actual formal presentation, I invite you to turn to your neighbor. See, I told you I was going to make you talk. I invite you to turn to your neighbor and talk about your hopes for tonight and your fears for tonight. What is one thing you hope we will talk about tonight? And what is one thing you fear we will talk about tonight? And I'm going to let you discuss this for a few minutes. Now, if you are on Twitter, you can discuss this also, or watching this live stream. Do we have a hashtag for this?
Hashtag SynodNE 2014.
Hashtag Synod, SYNODNE 2014. Synod NE 2014. Okay? So, what do you hope? What do you fear? Go. Okay? So what is it that you hope, and what is it that you fear? Would somebody be willing to share either a hope or a fear? Raise your hand, and bear with me because I will repeat back what you say since you are not mic'd. Yes, ma'am.
my hope would be that I could gain something tonight to help somebody who may not understand the deep issues of racism. And it could be a groundbreaker, an icebreaker, a great aha moment. So that's my hope. The fear is I may not get that.
Okay. So the hope is that you can get something tonight that could help be an aha moment or a groundbreaking moment for somebody to talk about racism, and the fear is that you might not get that. Thank you for sharing that. Any other hopes or fears? Yes?
My hope and fear are one and the same. I'm looking forward to and fearful of being in dialogue with other people about this because the dialogue is not happening where I live.
Okay.
And so that is my hope, but also my fear.
For those who didn't hear and for those who are live streaming, she hopes and fears being in dialogue about this because the dialogue is not happening where she lives, and so that is both her hope and her fear. Understand, the reason I'm doing this is both for the accommodation of those who need microphones to hear what I'm saying, as well as for those who are live streaming. Yes, sir.
So my hope is that we can talk about the way that police are trained. From what I've seen, police are trained to escalate situations instead of de-escalating situations. They're trained to increase the violence instead of decreasing the violence. And then it just gets out of control. And I think triggers are pulled when it gets out of control.
Right.
So I'd like to have a conversation about what we can do as citizens to change that paradigm.
Right.
And I actually don't have it.
So one of the hopes that has been raised, this gentleman says, he hopes that we can talk a little bit, and there was a young man in here talking to me about this earlier who's in law enforcement, about the way police are trained, because it seems as though police are trained to escalate and trigger violence rather than to de-escalate and make violence less problematic, and therefore they are as much of the problem. And what can we do as citizens and as Christians to engage that and to interact with that? Did I get that pretty much right? Okay, one more. Hope or fear? Yes?
Hope to address at a deeper level the systems that construct the reality and come up with alternative systems.
So hope to address the systems that construct the reality and come up with alternative systems. That's a lot to ask to do in 90 minutes, Ralph. But maybe something we talk about tonight can trigger that conversation within this Senate. I wanted to point out that we haven't had a voice of color. So I want to see if there's anybody of color who would like to speak a hope or a fear into the space. Hodari.
One of the hopes that I have is that we talk about the fear that feeds those systems in which we're talking about. And then my fear is what I've heard in much of this dialogue around this issue is the lack of empathy as it pertains to these communities and those affected by these systems.
So one of the things that Ari, and I know him by name because he was my student, don't hold that against him, is he hopes that the empathy, that there will be empathy of the fear that's in place in these systems. And fear that people will not have sympathy or empathy for those who are living in some of these communities. All right? So these and other hopes and fears are in the room. And I want to start there because there is nothing about this topic that is intellectual. Okay? This is completely outside of my comfort zone. I am a New Testament professor. This is not Greek. You know? So we're in the soup together. I'm hoping and that something I say tonight will trigger imagination, will trigger a work of justice. I fear that everything I've said tonight you already know. But we're going to go forward together and together unpack a little bit of what happened and is continuing to happen today on day 75 in Ferguson, Missouri. On August 9th, 2014, Michael J. Brown, a teenager from Ferguson, Missouri, was shot and killed by a police officer. He was unarmed. As we will see later, Brown's shooting, even his unarmed shooting, was not an unusual occurrence in the United States of America. So it has sparked over 2 months of protests and invited international comment. But why? Friends, let me suggest to you that Brown's death was the spark that ignited a very complex set of issues connected by the ontological reality of being black and poor in the United States of America. The ontological reality of being black and poor in the United States of America. Let's start on a smaller scale. For many black parents, regardless of class, and parents of black children who are not necessarily all black parents, especially in these days of transracial adoption. I've been on a lot of Facebook pages right now of transracial adoptees, and a lot of the white parents who have adopted black children are as frightened as the black parents of black children. So for many black parents and parents of black children, the shooting of Michael Brown was the galvanizing spark to sit down their children and have the talk. The talk is something that those of us raising white children probably will never have to do with our children. It is survival wisdom passed down from black parent to black child about how to survive and come home alive when confronted by law enforcement. Here is a question. This is not a rhetorical question. Who here has heard about the talk? Anybody here heard about the talk? Good. Has anybody here given or been given the talk? Or given the talk to their child? Would somebody be willing to describe what I mean by the talk?
You explain to your child, or you have explained to you, how you speak to a police officer, how you need to have your hands when you talk to a police officer, how the tone of your voice, so that you cannot be misconstrued as being uppity maybe, or belligerent, or something that's going to make them feel they have to act aggressively against you.
So it has to do with how you speak to a police officer, where your hands are, the tone of your voice, how you look at that officer, all of which is intended to diffuse a possibly lethal situation. Do you hear the fear that underlies the talk? See, until we get that's how scared people are, we don't begin to understand the emotion that's walking through the streets of Ferguson right now. We don't get that. I have a white son. Very white, like blonde hair, blue-eyed. Born in Iowa. Both his birth parents are white. I probably won't have to have that talk with him. If I had a black son, I would already be thinking about what I had to say. News of the death of Michael Brown sparked once more that painful need to have the talk, which is just one of thousands of racial microaggressions which phenotypically black people have to live every day. And if you don't know what racial microaggressions are, I suggest you open the television and watch Black-ish. Or go to the movie theater and watch Dear White People. You will learn. But the 4 hours that Brown's corpse was left lying where he died in the hot August sun, without allowing a family member to retrieve or tend to his body. That also sparked deep communal memories of lynching, of black bodies being left out in the open to die as a visible warning to any community member who might dare to cross the lines designated by the majority society. Although some of you might think this is long gone history, the killing of Michael McDonald in 1981 and James Byrd in 1998 happened within the lifetimes of the protesters of Brown's death. And several hanging deaths of young black men in this millennium are being questioned even today. In the handout, which you will get at the end of this presentation, and if you are online, I will give it to Synod of the Northeast as a PDF, and you'll be able to download it from there. But in the reference list, I've included a link to the story of the death of Lennon Lacey, a young black football player who was found hanging in the playground. His death was ruled a suicide. He had everything to live for and no visible signs of depression. He was dating a white woman. You may judge for yourselves. This was 2014. Okay, here's a question. Again, not a rhetorical question. Think about a trauma that has affected your family, your city, or your region, and 9/11 will do. How does the memory of societal or ongoing trauma affect the way that you interpret what's going on today? So how does the memory of trauma in your body affect the way that you interpret current events?
I'll speak to that. Having a personal tragedy in our family. I'm trying to think. There was a home in Gowanda, which is only about 6 miles from where I am and where Native American children do attend the school. And yet at that time, my nephew was headed down the wrong track, and so were his friends. There were 12 people in one bedroom partying, and then there was a house fire. And my nephew was the only Native American in that group that was partying, and the only one that wasn't rescued in time and got out in time. And so I know they're still looking at the accident as a possible arson to cover up a crime. But I mean, when my son speaks, he says, Leonard should have remembered that he's a Native American boy and Gowanda is white. That there still is discrimination going on, even though 1/3 of the Gowanda Central School system is Native American.
So how does that tragedy, for those of you who could not hear, she was describing a house fire in which 12 people were in a bedroom. Her nephew was one of the 12, the only Native American person in that bedroom, and the only one after the house fire not to be rescued in time. And there is investigation as to whether or not it was an arson to cover up something else. So her son says he should have remembered he was a Native American and not white. how does that affect the way you see the world?
For me, I feel bad that such a tragedy has happened. People, student, oh, yeah, student, elementary, the middle school, and the high school. So that if there's a problem within the school system,
Right?
that they can go to that officer and talk confidentially and.
Right. So there have been safeguards put in place, but how does it affect you? Are there hopes that you have because of that, or fears that you have because of that? Are you more afraid for your other children or your other nephews?
I want to say no because it was his behavior that got.
So no. Okay. Are there other people that have had incidents? Thank you. Are there other people that have had incidents of trauma that impact the way that they see other things? Are there things in this region that have been traumatic that have affected the way this region does business? Yeah?
I'd say, yeah, most of us have that, but, yeah, things have affected my life and the way I see fear. We teach our children, if you get stopped by a police officer, keep your hands to your sides and never move them, because if you go like this, that's resisting. Like, why are you bothering me? That's resisting arrest, but they don't know that unless you teach them.
Right. And that comes out of a fear.
It's a fear, so.
But it's based on a trauma.
Yeah, my family teaches all of the young people, don't move, keep your hands to your sides, be frozen.
Right.
And it came out of, one of my nephews was murdered in 2008.
One of my nephews was murdered in 2008, and now when I have my kids stopped by the cops, I tell them, put your hands by your sides, freeze, don't move.
Don't move.
Don't let them think you're resisting arrest.
Don't verbally.
And we can go on. I mean, think about the ways in which we react to the possibility of a backpack bomb in Times Square after 9/11 in New York City, right? Think about the way that this country is reacting to Ebola, right? I mean, are Boston and New York two of the thermometer airports? Because I know Atlanta is. We're the home of the CDC. We're Ground Central, apparently. All three New York airports are. See? So we have a trauma, we react. We have a trauma, lynching, we react. And when something triggers the trauma, and leaving a corpse in the middle of the road for 4 hours is a trigger, people are going to react. And so I want to underscore that the emotion here is justified. African Americans are not overreacting. They have lived with a lived experience of lynching and are particularly sensitized to the abuse and display of the dead black body in a way that non-African Americans might not be. Yes, Adari?
Even beyond the talk, there is within the African American community a level of physical abuse and or discipline that is inflicted upon young children to take that talk even further.
Right.
To train them in such a way that they will never act out or put themselves in a position where their lives can be threatened.
What you may not have heard what Hadaria was saying, but it came up in the news just recently with a football player beating his child with a stick, right? A switch, right? That there is a learned history of physical discipline and physical violence against African American children by their parents so that they are subservient enough not to get killed. And see, this is the thing that folks don't understand. Folks aren't doing this because they're backwards. Folks are doing this because they're scared. Because they don't want to have to bury their 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old. That is the level at which we need to deal with racism. Racism is not about an insult. Racism is not about who gets hired. Racism is, I don't have to worry about whether or not if I give my kid a timeout versus a spanking, I'm going to have to bury my kid at 16. That's the level we're dealing with. So that's the kind of ontology we're dealing with. Now, anger over Brown's death was exacerbated by long-term frustrations in the community about racist and classist practices, born primarily by the black community. One of these is called redlining. That's what's up on the screen right now. Redlining is a practice of being sold or rented homes only in certain neighborhoods, the poorest neighborhoods with the fewest resources. This was a practice of de facto segregation, very common in the North, where de jure segregation was not practiced. Literally, whites would be steered away from the areas in red on the map, and blacks would be sent into those areas. The houses would be devalued by those who set the property values, which would therefore immediately decrease the inherited wealth in that community. How many of you know that inherited wealth is one of the major forms of wealth acquisition in the United States of America? What you get from your parents, that your parents have something to give something to you, okay? Furthermore, with less opportunity to earn wealth, you ended up with the poorest of the poor in the poorest of the poor communities, segregated off from everybody else, and unable to move or rent anywhere. Now, let's add to the fact that taxation is tied to services by community, not by state or nation in this country. You do not have a national system whereby every school gets the same amount, regardless of whether or not the people in that system have a lot of money or a little money. If you live in a community that is highly valued homes, you're going to have lots of property taxes to be able to pay for lovely public schools. If you live in a community where the houses are devalued, the tax base is less. When the tax base is less, there's less money for schools in communities with more needs. That's how you get a Ferguson. This is intentional. This is not something that just happened. And we get to own, all of us who have money get to own our part in maintaining the system. So we want to talk about how we can act. We've got to first see what we need to act on, right? So I see a lot of nodding heads. How many of you have heard of redlining before? Oh, see, I told you, Northeast. Y'all know my stuff. Where and when have you seen redlining? And have you experienced the practice personally? Yes, sir.
Did a college survey in Charlotte, North Carolina, near where I was there, and it was just clear from the census tract as to how the patterns were. It was just clear.
So in Charlotte, North Carolina, when he did a college survey, of course, that may also have been due to de jure segregation, not just de facto segregation. How about in the North? Back, all the way in the back, standing up. Wanted to stand to talk about it.
Well, we did for 5 years in Oak Park, Illinois.
Oak Park, Illinois. Oh, wonderful.
The first, I don't know if it's on, so, the first suburb west of the city line And Oak Park was sort of an experiment. In the real estate, the realtors chose not to put signs up on the lawns and tried to combat redlining. Now we were there in the late 80s, early 90s, and that had been a practice in the mid 70s on. I don't know whether or not it was ultimately successful.
Right.
Because someone brought suit that they, had to put the realtor signs on lawns and such. But they, as a city of Oak Park, fought really hard to maintain an integrated community and good schools for all. Mm-hmm. But it was probably one of the few efforts to be that proactive to combat redlining, because in the whole west section of the city of Chicago, where there had been 10 Presbyterian churches, they were down to like 2 because of the white flight in the 60s and 70s. So Oak Park was a different case, and I don't know if anyone has researched the impact it's had.
Any other thank you very much. Any other people want to talk about redlining? Yes.
Okay, a number of years ago, maybe about 10 years ago, I was trying to buy a house in Washington, D.C. with 2 African-American friends, and it was at the beginning of the gentrification that took D.C. by storm over those years, and we were steered to certain neighborhoods and told that's where we could buy. And they also attempted, because I was with my 2 black friends, to get us involved in the subprime loans that blew up in everybody's face. And it was very clear to us what was going on.
Wow. Thank you for that. You had your hand up, and I want to hear your voice.
I was just going to say, my niece who is married to, thank you. My niece who has been married, I guess they've been married 4 years now, were to an engineer, tried to purchase property in South Hills, Pennsylvania. And South Hills is a suburb of Pittsburgh. North Hills and South Hills are predominantly white, while the eastern and western portion of the city of Pittsburgh is predominantly poor and African American until recently. And when they went to buy a home, they were steered away from South Hills, which is closer to the place where my nephew works, and encouraged to buy in the eastern section, which they ultimately did. But they did that not only because of redlining, but because they were afraid to live in the neighborhood because of things that happened while they were actually viewing a house which had been devalued, and the homeowners did not want to sell to them, but didn't know how to say no. And that was this is 2014, just in 2014. So it still happens.
There was a story recently about somebody going to see a property that he was just purchasing and being shot to death by a neighbor who thought he was a burglar. That is the level of fear we're dealing with. Now, the people who are doing the aggression here are the people who demographically make up the majority of the Presbyterian Church USA. So we talked about what can the church do. I am now preaching to the people that actually deal with that demographic, for the most part. There are some of you who work in predominantly black churches, but for the most part. This is our demographic. We are Presbyterians. Okay, to these red line communities created by racist practices and sustained by classist means of distributing government support for schools and other needs based on an intentionally depreciated tax base came the broken windows theory of policing. This theory suggested zero tolerance be given for the lowest level crimes. This, it was argued, would stop things from devolving. If you let a broken window go, then the next thing you'll have is graffiti and gangs. Broken windows theories have given us such police practices as stop and frisk. That's what a broken windows theory looks like in practice. Eric Garner is what a broken windows theory looks like in practice. He was breaking the law. He was selling cigarettes illegally, one at a time. That's what he was doing when he was given the death penalty. Selling cigarettes. Broken windows theory. Okay? You stop crime at its lowest level and then you will obliterate it. Unsurprisingly, statistically, those who suffered and continue to suffer most from these broken windows theories of policing were and are black and brown people. According to U.S. News and World Report, the ratio of broken window punishments between black and brown people and others in New York City is 4-to-1. 81% of those punished through broken windows violations were black and Latino, black and Hispanic. And this, in turn, leads to a disproportionate number of fines being levied on the poorest of the poor, and what some have called the return of the debtor's prison. In August, Joseph Shapiro of National Public Radio reported that, and I quote, in 2013, the municipal court in Ferguson, a city of 21,135 people, issued 32,975 arrest warrants for nonviolent offenses, mostly driving violations. This resulted in $2.6 million in fines in Ferguson, which was the city's second biggest source of income. Remember, all of this is above and beyond the shooting of Brown. This is the context in which this shooting is being interpreted. This is what is driving folks into the streets in October in Missouri. How many of you have heard of the broken windows theory? Okay, so fewer of you have heard of the broken windows theory. Okay? Is that a surprise to some of you? Okay. How many of you hadn't heard about the rise of people in debt being thrown into prison? Again, fewer of you. Okay? Is anyone willing to share a story about that from your part of the synod? No stories on broken windows theory? Yes?
Actually, Margaret, the last church that I served, which was in Plainfield, New Jersey, it was an urban church. I had a young woman who was multiracial and who had had a number of legal issues and spent half of the time that I served as pastor of that church in jail, all over debt issues related to her various the various drug charges that she was in and the various fines that were levied against her that neither she nor her family could pay. And so it just became cyclical for her, and so she just kept going back. She'd be out for a few weeks and then she'd end up back and forth, and had two babies at home during this time that also ended up in the
foster care system
in DIFAS, and then were victimized through that.
Any other broken windows stories? Yes. There's a.
I honestly never thought about it in this context. My kids are mixed.
And my daughter has had that happen, where she gets fines, and then she gets warrants, and then she gets fines, and then she gets warrants, and so is her boyfriend. And I never thought about it that way, but it fits.
Yeah. And so you're seeing it, but you never knew the theory existed.
Right.
And who do you think gets it most, adults or kids?
The kids.
Kids, because if we can stop the small things, right, then we won't have to deal with the big things. So if you are a 14-year-old shoplifting, because 14-year-olds shoplift occasionally, you know, they take things from stores because they don't have impulse control because they're 14. You know, that's what we do. We're trying to raise them to have impulse control. You know, you're a 14-year-old, you're caught shoplifting. It's not a matter of you're grounded and you have to go to the shop and work for the shopkeeper to pay for what you stole and apologize to the shopkeeper in person. It is, you are going before the criminal justice court and you have a record and you may have to go to juvie for a couple of months. Recently came out that the demographic of kids most often multiply suspended from preschool. Preschool. Now, that's 4 years old. Are African American children. Preschool. What does it do to a child to be multiply suspended from preschool? Because at 4 years old, they can't sit still. Hadari.
As you were saying this, I began to think prior to my appointment at the church that I'm at, I was a truancy officer, and a host of young African American men of the ages from 16 to 17 were hit with child support at that young age, and in school and unable to work. Many of them, upon graduation or even before graduation, wound up in the judicial system as a result of being unable to pay child support. There were warrants issued for their arrests, and many of them were unable to satisfy those and are still incarcerated, to this day.
The broken windows theory. Michael Brown had successfully graduated from high school. He was an exception in Ferguson. Whether or not the 18-year-old was smoking pot, because 18-year-olds never smoke pot, right? I didn't, but I had asthma, so that was my excuse. I mean, really, that really was my excuse. I couldn't smoke anything. But 18-year-olds, honey, I went to Harvard. You could not go up the stairs without going through clouds of pot. 18-year-olds smoke pot. Hello? That's not the issue. He was the one that was the exception. He had gotten through. Why do you think there was such emotion among his peers, among those immediately after him, when he was the one shot down, charging or not, and left to rot in the sun for 4 hours? You get it? See, this does not come out of just one thing or another thing. This comes out of an entire lived experience that most of us never have to live. Most of us can be perfectly oblivious to. And I am among that most of us. Because of the career I have, because of the husband I have, because of the child I have, because where I live, and because who my parents are, I am mostly oblivious to this. I do not come from the United States. I don't have this story. I have a different narrative, different oppression. But if this is what you have had to be taught since before you were 4 years old, at some point, the raisin in the sun will explode. At some point. Okay, let's add one more thing to this. The Department of Defense Excess Property Program, DOD 1033. And I have a handout which everyone will get afterward. It has all of this information. It also has a huge list, because you know I'm an academic, a huge bibliography at the end, mostly websites that you can go check and learn more. In this program, the Defense Department sends excess equipment from our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and all over the world to local municipalities upon their request. So one of the small communities in Georgia just north of the city has a tank. I still don't understand why they have Humvees in Georgia, so I don't understand a tank. There's no off-road. It's all road, trust me. The scenes of Ferguson police coming in with tear gas and armored vehicles are because they got these vehicles upon a DOD 1033 request. A program that has been charged with militarizing lots of local police forces. How many of you knew about DOD 1033? Okay, that was not a surprise. Okay. I mean, I'm interested how many of you didn't know about the broken bottles theory, because you knew about stop and frisk. So to know that this is actually what's being taught law enforcement is something you need to know. Now let's add one more complexity. This is the atmosphere in which Michael Brown was shot. But earlier this month, the news agency ProPublica published a report that underscored what the black community had been feeling for generations, that its youth are being targeted by the police. As NPR's Michelle Martin reported, according to ProPublica, a black teen like Michael Brown was 21 times more likely to be shot dead by police than an equivalent white teen. A black teen is 21 times more likely to be shot dead than a white teen. Gabrielson, Grokowski, and Gabara, the writers of the ProPublica article, state further, and I quote, "The 1,217 deadly police shootings from 2010 to 2012 captured in the federal data," so that's the data we have, which is not all the data there is, shows that blacks ages 15 to 19 were killed at a rate of 31.17 per million, while just 1.47 per million white males in that age range died at the hands of police. 31.17 versus 1.47. One way of appreciating that stark disparity, ProPublica's analysis shows, is to calculate how many more whites over those 3 years would have had to have been killed for them to have been at equal risk. The number is jarring. 185 more than one per week. And that's Gabrielson et al., 2014. The link is in the resource. These realities, friends, are the subject of the talk that parents of African Americans have to have with their children by the time they hit early adolescence. This is the reality with which many families live on a daily basis. This, my friends, is the United States of America for many, many people. Okay? I'm going to give you a 5-minute break to talk to one another. I want you to talk about what you've heard. How are you feeling? What are you thinking? What have you heard? How are you feeling? How are you thinking? What are you thinking? All right, I'm going to have you come back together. I want to have you come back together. The Lord be with you. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Thank you. I am encouraged that you're having a hard time stopping. I am encouraged because this will not be solved by my speaking to you. This will be solved by your speaking to each other and by your working together. I can do nothing to fix this. I can simply highlight the problem. You, in this synod, are the ones who can fix it. I can't do it. So what were your thoughts? What were your feelings? What came up? Because, man, I had a hard time getting you to stop talking. And I'd love to hear some voices we haven't heard yet. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm just saying that you actually haven't said any individual thing that I didn't already know, at least intellectually. But hearing it all put together
Right.
leaves you with a much more powerful, I think, understanding of something that conditions that I have never had to live in. I must say, and that my children have never had to live in. So, thank you for kind of putting a lot of the pieces together in one talk.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your thought, and thank you for sharing that. Someone else, thoughts or feelings that came up?
I guess I was surprised by all the figures that you showed us and the tragedy, and particularly when you said about a 4-year-old, that already they're being suspended from school. If it's starting before they're 4 years old, that's terrible. That's just terrible. What can a 4-year-old know about what they have to do? Can you have your talk with a 4-year-old?
Right.
And there's just so many other things. But I said at the very beginning, one of the biggest problems I have with our society is intolerance. A black person can't hide the fact that they're a black person. A gay person might be able to, and other people might be able to. But a black person, it's right out there in the front.
That's right.
It's not a nice situation. And I was hoping that you'd have the answers.
If I had the answers, I would also have the Nobel Prize, and I might be dead. And anybody else have thoughts or feelings? Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that came up in our discussion, or how I interpret it within my own self, was the police are here to protect us, and they're here to protect all of us. And I personally have never had a bad experience with the police, but I can't say the same for a lot of my black male friends. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it in front of me. So the things that haven't happened to us are a reality, are an everyday situation for so many people among us. And it's not just, being stopped and frisked on your way to work. It is the potential to lose your life on the way to work, like Oscar Grant, like Kamari Bell, I believe his name was. So these things are really important to discuss, and it's also really important to realize that a person's frame of reference and everything that they've encountered is not fact. Everyone's frame of reference put together in a conglomerate is how we can hammer out what's fact and what's misleading, I would say.
Thank you so much. Can you tell us about that feeling you're feeling underneath? Because your voice is cracking.
That's speaking in public.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Then thank you very much. Give her a hand. She did a great job of speaking in public and being afraid. Any other thoughts or feelings?
I'm not sure if you've ever, I'm the same guy I talked before. Have you ever read the book Black Like Me? 1961? That was a very interesting book, and I was only a young kid at that time when I read it. But the transition from being a white man to a black man and how it changed his life, I think that's not a bad reading even today.
And there was a recent television show, somebody who's more TV literate helped me, where they actually had families change from black to white. Do you remember this? Black White is what it was called. YouTube it, because what ended up happening is they put on makeup and prostheses to make people look a different race and sent them into different situations. And then they came back to talk about what it was to live in the other person's shoes. So think about it. Yes, ma'am. And then, yes, sir.
we talked about how those of us who raised our children in the suburbs and our children lived a different experience, and then they say to us, oh, you're overreacting, or, well, we don't live like that anymore, because they don't see race as the same way, and they have experienced racism in the same way. And now that my daughter is an adult, and she's out in the world of work, she's starting to see things, and she's not understanding them. She does not understand it's because she's black. And so they're at a disadvantage almost, because, I mean, it's an advantage because they don't limit themselves because of their race, but then they also don't see the dangers that may face them.
Yep, and that's a reality for immigrant black children too. I'm an immigrant. And many of the times I didn't know what was going on. The gentleman back there had his hand up first, so can we get him first? Thank you.
Just echo the immigrant experience. This is not an issue between black and whites.
Right.
Or African Americans, I should say,
Right.
and whites. This is an issue of people who have lived in this country for as long as African Americans have been here, and even before that, right? And people who have been here for generations who do not trace their heritage to the United States.
Right.
And people who are coming in. You know,
Or who do not trace their heritage to Western Europe.
Right. Me getting to talk, not in my home country because I'm light-skinned, but getting to talk as I was coming to study at Princeton.
Right.
Because of where I was from.
Right.
You know, and it happened.
And this is an American citizen talking, because he was born in Puerto Rico, right? I wasn't born in Puerto Rico. I am far less of an American than he is, because I was born in a foreign country. I actually had to get a green card and naturalized, okay? And he had to have the talk about coming to the United States, where he's from, because of his accent and what he looks like.
Margaret, I'm thinking back 2 years ago. One of my sons, who works in an African American school, and he's a teacher. He's really been a really stellar teacher and all. But he was riding his bicycle, and the New York City police beat him up, put him in jail overnight. Now, this is a guy who's been like an award-winning teacher. And I remember getting the call that night, because you were asking about feelings. I remember getting the call that night from his wife. And the powerlessness. Now, I mean, I'm recognizing we have a lot of power, my family, myself, my son. So I just touched the tip of what it must feel like. Because at that point, there was nothing you can do with the system to protect your child.
Right.
They have them.
That's right.
And so I'm thinking that if I feel that way, how exponentially more someone who has less power, less privilege than I do.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's what I was experiencing.
Exactly.
As you were talking. Thank you.
Exactly.
I work with an organization that has been focusing on the killing of black men, women, and children since 2007 and has a database of 1,000 people. The Malcolm X Grassroots Project now is using a statistic of a black person getting killed every 28 hours by the police or security guards or vigilantes. I've spent a lot of time with this organization talking to white people and have been very frustrated with the fact that a lot of us don't feel what it is that people of color feel. And because we don't feel it, it's too easy to gloss it over. And I think of the Ella Baker song that Sweet Honey in the Rock sings, until the killing of a black man, black mother's son, is as important as the killing of a white man, white mother's son.
We who believe in freedom
We who believe in freedom shall not rest. And my feelings come in of a particular frustration in our church that we are not taking this kind of issue up. We talk about gun violence, but we talk about it in a way that it's out there. It's not in here. And it's not in here for our sisters and brothers who have to face this every day when they go out in the world. And it angers me, and I'm always trying to figure out ways to say things differently or do things differently that we can begin to act differently.
Last one, and then we're going to go on. Go on. Sorry.
You were talking about fear before. Talk about the 4-year-old who gets sent home because of misbehavior, because he or she can't stand still, and the way I was feeling is that this creation of racism and this systemic oppression, the majority culture has the privilege of raising their kids, and you get to tell them dream and dream big and explore yourself, and if you get into trouble, that's you exploring yourself. And when you're talking about fear, and in my experience about black and brown bodies, you don't get that luxury. Since you are born, you are kind of conditioned by this systemic oppressive, whatever we want to call it, and it's really deep, and it's not. The result are the killings and all of that, but the result at the same time, we are getting generations of brown and black bodies and whomever is not part of the majority society is not being able to explore the freedom that everyone else explores, because you just can't.
So what you're saying essentially is the brown and black bodies are the symptom, not the problem.
Correct.
The brown and black bodies are the symptoms of a much bigger problem.
I'll give you an amen on that.
A much bigger problem. And if we are here just to talk about Michael Brown, we're not here to talk about the problem. The death of Michael Brown is a symptom of the bigger problem, and just one symptom of the bigger problem. Enter the prophet of the Presbyterian Church, and I don't mean me. I mean that guy. On August 21st, the Office of Public Witness of the PCUSA published a blog on this state of affairs. The Reverend J. Herbert Nelson II, its director, and incidentally a graduate of my fair school, called the church to repentance and action. Reverend Nelson declared, and I quote, "The Presbyterian Church USA is called through our confessional documents to be the church of every age. God's reconciling work in Jesus Christ and the mission of reconciliation to which he has called his church are the heart of the gospel in any age. Our generation stands in peculiar need of reconciliation in Christ. It is not enough for us as Christians to be appalled or sad while viewing Ferguson, Missouri as a place beyond our own reality. We must be clear that the issues of this shooting are deeper than anything one trial can resolve. Yes, it is about the shattered hopes of a family that has lost a loved one, a loss that will reverberate for generations, but is also deeply and truly about the social sin of prejudice, bigotry, and institutionalized racism, which is embedded in our social structures, our justice system, and the laws by which we claim to offer freedom to each other." Further, says Nelson, and I quote, "We as church must confront the social sin of racism head on. We must get outside our church buildings, beyond our comfort zones, and say loud and clear, this is my brother and I will not accept that his life is less valuable than mine. The violence has to stop. We must be willing to challenge the culture that tells African American boys that their lives are worth less than the lives of white boys. We live in a culture that attempts to justify itself by claiming self-defense when we really mean fear and bigotry or pride and individualism, but all of this is sin. Our faith reminds us that God is all sovereign and that, and I quote, God calls us to love our neighbors, not protect ourselves against our neighbors. As I said, the prophet of the Presbyterian Church. Friends, what Reverend Nelson is saying is that these signs of the time are a call, first of all, to pay attention. We must, as a church, pay attention to the kinds of policies that lead to a Ferguson. Policies instituted in our local communities that criminalize black and brown poor people, that target as criminal elements black and brown teenagers, particularly, but not exclusively, teenaged boys, that isolate and deprive of assistance poor communities, and that perpetuate the long history in the U.S. of the devaluation of the black body. We must hear once more the call of the prophet Isaiah. What do you mean by crushing my people, by grinding the face of the poor, says the Lord of hosts? What do you mean by crushing my people, by grinding the face of the poor? Moreover, this is a call to coalition building and partnership. We must look for those who are already doing what needs to be done. This is one of the things I need to say to Presbyterians. We don't need to invent it. It's already being done. Go join it. And we don't need to be in charge when we get there. Wait at least 5 years before you tell them how to build a system of governance. Okay? We must find ways to join forces, not as leaders, but as learners. See, there are communities for whom the broken glass theory is not news. We need to be learners and partners, putting our privilege down and taking our prayers to the street, or better, using our privilege to open doors that those who have been fighting this for years cannot get opened. And being okay with being a footnote. Further, as we stand 1 week from Dia de los Muertos and All Saints' Day, it's time that we remember the dead. Those who have died from policies that target poor black and brown people. Reverend Nelson has a long list on his blog, just from 2013 and 2014. That is also in the resources section of the handout, which you will get at the end of this. But so too does Melissa Harris Perry.
In the past decade alone, January 24th, 2004, Timothy Stansberry, Brooklyn, New York, unarmed. November 25th, 2006, Sean Bell, Queens, New York, unarmed. January 1, 2009, Oscar Grant, Oakland, California, unarmed. January 29th, 2010, Aaron Campbell, Portland, Oregon, unarmed. July 18th, 2011, Alonzo Ashley, Denver, Colorado, unarmed. March 7th, 2012, Wendell Allen, New Orleans, Louisiana, unarmed. September 14th, 2013, Jonathan Farrell, Charlotte, North Carolina, unarmed. July 17th, 2014, Eric Garner, Staten Island, New York, unarmed. August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri, unarmed. In the past decade alone, these men and hundreds of others have lost their lives to police. Local police report to the FBI killing at least 400 people a year. From 2006 to 2012, a white police officer killed a black person at least twice a week in this country.
For all the saints who from their labors rest. When HIV and AIDS, when I was doing a lot of work in HIV and AIDS, one of the most powerful things that happened in that time was I got a chance to see the quilt laid out in Washington, D.C. And the thing the quilt did for HIV and AIDS was it turned this from a hidden disease to people. Because as they unfold the quilt and lay it down, the ritual is that every name on that quilt is read aloud. We need to know these names. Right now, tonight, in Trenton, New Jersey, Shiloh Baptist Church is having a 7 last words service. And it is not Good Friday. But the 7 last words are the last words of people like Eric Gardner, I can't breathe, and Amadou Diallo, Mom, I'm going to college. Hands up, don't shoot. It's time for a church with as much voice and as much power as we have to name the names and to say that these names are our brothers and our sisters and we are their keeper. It's time. The Belhar Confession, on which we are taking our second denominational vote this year, also holds us accountable. It calls us to confess that the church must stand by people in any form of suffering and need, which implies, among other things, that the church must witness against and strive against any form of injustice so that justice may roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. The Belhar Confession also says, the church as the possession of God must stand where the Lord stands, namely against injustice and with the wronged. That in following Christ, the church must witness against all the powerful and privileged who selfishly seek their own interests and thus control and harm others. You wanted solutions. I'm not going to give you solutions. I'm going to lay out the problem. But now here's the challenge. I'm going to give you a few minutes to talk again. What could a local church do to address one of these things? Not to take on the entire structure. What could a local church do? And think about your local church. Think about your local church with just all young people under 57 years old. Think about your don't laugh, we have a pastor in here with a local church with under 57 years old people. In this synod, I'll have you know. Think about your church in which the youngest person is 65. Think about your church. Think about the churches you serve as a synod exec, as a presbytery exec, as a stated clerk. Think about your presbyteries. What one thing could you do to address even one of these issues? Because years ago, Toddy Peters, how many of you know Rebecca Todd Peters? Okay, you need to go find her in your bibliographies at some point. Rebecca Todd Peters. Different set of issues, fantastic ethicist. And a shout out to my friend from Union. But Toddy was doing a piece on the global economy. And all of us were looking at her with crossed eyes as if, what are we supposed to do? And Toddy said, do one thing. Pick one thing. Because you can't get it all. But you can get at it through one of various ways. So what one thing could you do? And the second question is, with whom might you partner? What one thing could you do? And with whom might you partner? After we come back from the break, I'm going to take questions and comments from that. And also, if there are questions or comments that are coming from Twitter, hello Twitter, shoot them to me also. Positive and negative, that's fine. You can tell me this was terrible, that's okay. My ego can handle it. My students tell me that on a weekly basis, it's okay. Okay, so take a few minutes and talk to each other about the one thing you can do, one thing. Help each other if you're stuck. Help each other, push yourselves. Find one thing, go. I'm going to call you back together. I know you've solved the entire world's problems. But we only have 15 minutes left. And they're talking. Sisters and brothers, praise the Lord. The Lord's name be praised. So, who's got one thing? Who's got one thing? Yes, sir.
Simplest way to start, I've been a police chaplain now 40 years, a good fella, that from way back, relations for them, and it would be an open door to where the concerns the church people have could come before the right people. The police can't stop their work, they've got to do it, but they should do it right and with sensitivity. And the thing that I've observed over the years is if they can avoid the confrontation that isn't necessary, particularly with the young or the mentally ill,
that might be able to head off a calamity like this. There may be other ways to contain something without, fatal action. And sometimes it's a split second. It's all they have to make the right decision. They're trained in that. It's not easy. But people need to talk with each other, the police administration and the local church people. And it's doable.
That is a great one thing. That is a great one thing. And I'm going to push that further. Get the church, the police, and some youth together. And let the church mediate so that the police know who the youth are and the youth know who the police are. And they can create community rather than conflict. Of course, that requires what? That the church know who the youth are and that the church know who the police are. Yes?
Just to follow up on what he said, we did that last month. We brought together the prosecutor, the chief of police, pastor, and the so-called problem, which was one of the Central Park Five, who sat down and had conversation about those particular things and what police are doing. And the young people, our youth group sponsored it. And what we found in that dialogue was expressed the level of fear that some police officers have with youth, and then the youth and some of the fear they have with police officers. And then they talked about the sensitivity training, and they talked about what officers are trained in terms of excessive use of excessive force. In addition, there were some cultural things that were brought out, and police officers had no idea. I don't know how it is in certain circles, but in my community, sometimes we get a little loud. We talk loud with one another. And police need to understand that it's not
a fight.
It's us talking with one another. And for them, that was an eye-opener. Just how they approach young black men who are on the corner having a conversation. So it's very fruitful conversation, and it helps people to understand one another, and it's something that can be very beneficial to all of our churches and our communities.
Would your youth and you be willing to be a resource to other churches in the synod on how to do that?
Yes.
Okay, you have one. Just don't let him get away. Yeah.
Margaret, I just read The New Jim Crow, and my husband's an attorney, and I could only read parts at a time because it was so infuriating to think, if you're raised and taught to trust the system in terms of that they're there to protect us and see how corrupt it is, it just, worlds collide. And and you saying that, it's like having just a book review, a book discussion, but make sure to include some attorneys. Most Presbyterian churches have an attorney. I mean, we kind of attract those kinds of, and to have them all read it, lead the book discussion, because I think they'll tell the truth that what's in that book is so true. And I just find it devastating for America that that's what's happening, and I didn't realize it. So I just think that book is...
There is wisdom in just not being ignorant. Right. And I don't mean that to be insulting. There was a movie a while ago called A Dry White Season. It was years ago when I was teaching high school back in the 90s. We used to use it when I taught about apartheid. And it was a story of a white South African, a white Afrikaner, who, because of his relationship with his gardener, went looking for his gardener's son when he got caught up in the apartheid prison system. And it was in the process of trying to find his gardener's son that he lost his wife, he lost his employment, he lost his position, and he became all of a sudden very much aware of where he was living. Because he didn't realize the extent to which he was living in a police state until he started caring about those who were underneath the police state. There is something about teaching and learning that is radical. And then the question is, what do you do with that knowledge once you know it? And that question is a question for that community. Because every community is going to do something different with that knowledge. But if you happen to have a whole lot of attorneys in your church, are there ways you can use that power base to affect some change locally, regionally, statewide, nationally? I mean, all things start at a regional and local level. All things, even Presbyterian changes. Okay, so that's another thought. Book group, yes. Ralph.
Attorneys.
Attorneys.
People caught in the criminal justice system. One of the things the NAACP has started doing in New Jersey is going to court. They send people to go to court because a lot of these young people come in there with no attorney, no family with them, and we can stand up with them and for them in advocating with and for them in the system. The restorative justice system should replace this kind of vengeance-seeking based solely on color.
So let me ask you, Ralph, does the NAACP train people to be people that accompany youth into the system, into these places?
Yes, there's restorative justice training at Rutgers.
Okay, so in other words, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was what it used to be called before they decided just to be the NAACP, which is in every state in the Synod, has a program that if you choose, you can join and you can change something. And it may not help all the starfish, but it matters to that one starfish.
That's right.
Yeah?
As a commissioner, all of us are going to be reporting back to our presbytery, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is going to shake them up? Some of these statistics are going to shake these people up. I'm from northern New England. We have a lot of very small, elderly, pure white congregations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just doing some education is going to open some eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondarily, my pastor's daughter is a public defender in the city where I live. And I think the church, I'm going to approach them to see what we can get Sarah to come and do some programs with us, educate us.
Small churches in northern New England have resources to do something prophetic. Did you realize that? Oh, I heard the church was dying. Small does not mean dead, people. Small has never meant dead. Jesus started with 12. Yes, ma'am.
We took on redlining back in the 80s, got a grant from the Self-Development of People, and in Utica, New York, and basically made it disappear from our church.
Would you be willing to tell that story, to have it archived, to teach other people how you did it?
Well, we'd have to dig back in. Yeah, sure.
There's a resource in Utica, New York, for those of you who like snow. Okay? Who's taken on redlining? That's the other thing about, I hear people complaining all the time about the Presbyterian Church having old people. Old people have done stuff. They know stuff. Talk to old people. They have a wealth of wisdom. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yads, are you listening to me? Talk to old people. They know stuff. Yes.
A very simple idea shared with me is to remember the people who have died by gun violence in that week in the prayer concerns.
Yes. If you had a weekly, as part of your prayer concerns, we also remember the following people this week who have been killed by gun violence. What happens to a church when that is the weekly litany? What happens to the people in the church when that's the weekly litany? There's a gentleman back there who wants to say something.
Well, what would a synod leader do? We'll be hearing reports tomorrow One will be from our working group on race. We've identified that if this was going to take some deep, long work, but there is emerging a place where we can bring those resources together to show those best practices, to show those places where people have that one thing and other people can see them and learn from them. And I'm so glad our moderator for that working group is here in the room, and as well as some other participants in that work. But that's one way, is for us to pool those best ideas, not just once a year or once every 2 years for assemblies, but to have an ongoing commitment to that, and we do.
Senator's resource, look at that. Senator's resource, sin boldly, my brother, sin boldly. That would be SYN. Any others? Any from the Twitterverse? Anybody on Twitter wanted to say anything? Yeah, you've been following Twitter, Steve. And then I'll get this young lady. You add, and then we'll do Twitter.
Hello, thank you for coming. I'm part of the multi-faith community here at Stony Point.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm also on the board of the Council on American Islamic Relations in New York City.
Cool.
And one of the biggest things that we've had to, challenging things that we've had to face in New York City is fighting the stop and frisk with regards to the minorities, not just the Muslim community, but the Latino community, the Asian community, the African American community. And the best way that we found to combat it is to work together with our interfaith partners. For example, we work a lot with Asian American organizations, civil rights organizations, a lot with the Sikh community, with a lot of Latino organizations, and a lot of people of color in general, and teach them their civil rights. For example, nobody can ask for their immigration papers other than an immigration person. We teach them how to train harassment, against harassment by any kind of bullying or any kind of police brutality. So we found that the training in different houses of worship was very, very instrumental. And when we go to City Hall or when we go to the NYPD and we argue, there's definitely more power in numbers and in our diversity, because when one person is attacked, we're all attacked in general. So definitely work with your
would you be willing to be a resource for members of this community who would like to know more about the Multi-Faith Initiative and maybe getting involved in that?
Definitely.
Okay, so find her at the end of tonight, right? What I want you to see is that I don't need to have the answer. You have the answer. It's when you see all these issues together, you go, but wait, we did that on redlining a few years ago. I know what to do about that. Oh, but wait, I know how to create a program where the church can go into the kindergartners and help the teachers. Oh, but wait, I know how to do a youth accompaniment program. I did that in Colombia. Oh, but wait, and all of a sudden you go, wait, but I know how to do that. So do what you know how to do. Any notes from Twitter, and then I'm going to bed. What did Twitter have to say, Steve?
Well, one of the things that, besides those of us who are tweeting, just kind of retweeting each other and favoriting things, I was reminded, you talked at the beginning, Margaret, about preaching to the choir. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten 4 responses to the thing I tweeted about Michael Brown's body lying in the street and it bringing back images of lynching. That reminds me how much I'm in the choir. Mm-hmm. Somebody who sent me a link to I know this is an oxymoron, Fox News story about why the medical people, the reasons why they let his body lay there so long. Somebody who said, was he in the street or in a tree? The two are very different things. Somebody who said, this may be the dumbest thing I've ever read. And this one, possibly he was in the street because the lynch mob of residents became too violent and wouldn't allow the body to be removed.
You will not be the most popular people in the world when you do this.
And these are people in places I have no idea who they are, how they ever found what little things I tweeted.
But you know what? The church has always caused people to be uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be nice if the church caused people to be uncomfortable, not because of what we think about sex, but because of what we think about justice?
Well, and yep.
As I used to tell my students at ITC all the time, there was a time when the black church was bombed for fighting for justice. When was the last time you heard about a black church being bombed?
And one of the things I thought of is, you know, we may be the choir, but choirs make noise.
Choirs make a whole heck of a lot of noise.
And there's all kinds of stories of people walking by churches and hearing choirs practice.
That's right.
So sing on.
And if we do this, it doesn't matter if they come. Because we are not called to be the cheerleaders of the world. We're called to be disciples of the one who said, take up your cross and follow me. So, because my sister over here jumped the gun on me, we're going to end the way she ended.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. I said, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons is as important as the killing of all men, all mothers' sons. That which touches me most is that I had a chance to work with people, passing on to others that which was passed on to me.
Thank you and good night.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Oh yes, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. To me, young people come first. They have the courage of where we failed. And if I could just shed some light as they carry us through the gale. The older I get, the better I know that the secret of my going on is when the reins are in the hands of the young who dare to run against a storm. 'Cause we who believe in freedom cannot rest. Oh, oh, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. The older I get, the better I know that the secret of my going on is when the reins are in the hands of the young who dare to run against a storm, not needing to clutch for power, not needing the light just to shine on me. I need to be one in the number as we stand against tyranny. 'Cause we who believe in freedom cannot rest. Oh yes, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Struggling myself don't mean a whole lot. I've come to realize that teaching others to stand up for what's right is how.
One thing I forgot to tell you, one thing I forgot to tell you, because I really do want you to know this. The presentation I did just now is available on the World Wide Web. In other words, you have access to all of the slides and you can run them just like I ran them. The link to the Prezi is, I'm going to try to find out where it is. If it's not here, I will give it to you by Synod, but I think I put it here. Okay, I don't have it here. I will send the Synod the link to the slides I just used. They are on the web, so you can just use them. You don't need my permission. Okay?